Gridon Raja Shima, Tamidin, Bejan, Trawa, Timbo, Pisu, Sujun, Traye de Jan, Tender de Pije, Juye, Meto, Trama, Regali, Gembo. Medembo, and the Queen of the King, Shemara, Etam, Guru, Sanganje, Chedon, Sojejo, Sancho, Bando, Don, Shamsu, Nagi, Chugin, Sonum, Nola, Pisha, Sanjin, Rubber, Sho, Sanganje, Chedon, Sojejo, Sancho, Bando, Don, Shamsu, Nagi, Chugin, Sonum, Nola, Pisha, Sanjin, Rubber, Sho, Sanganje, Chedon, Sojejo, Sancho, Bando, Don, Shamsu, Nagi, Chugin, Sonum, Nola, Pisha, Sanjin, Rubber, 원라스 마주난 기타다님이 생계 탐지지 된도 토잘라나면 방향다 보조게 선지 조금 바로 뭐 지겠는지 더블샤고 대더블샤비 체도 담배 죄는 뭐 지세냐 베고노 상유지 셈지 제 셈베고는 셈을죠.
Let us cultivate the altruistic motivation seeking complete enlightenment for the sake of liberating infinite, kind, mother sentient beings. With that kind of bodhicitta motivation, that we should all participate in this teaching.
Can we come over here? Jonas. 다 아니 나랑 소말로다 배 양이도 쟁거에 길은 다적도 메시지 터가 아니 뭐 달로니 동가적 그걸 놓으시네 지금나신 아니 담비셔 비소요레스
One of the things that we all need to reflect on often is this, that over 2,500 years ago, Shakyamuni Buddha, our historical teacher, appeared in India.
So that any penita, only Zabakin to sit in yours.
Buddha appeared in India and he performed what we generally talk about as 12 principal deeds of Shakyamuni Buddha.
That Sanjay Kandajin, that Sanjay Kamdi, Namani, Sanjay Veshavata, Karigu as a run somebody giver. Tambo Sanju to the Toshe, and a part of Kachi Ramesh to Chosa, and a Tarangabas of Sanjay, that the Rikita. When we
look at Shakyamuni Buddha, how he became Buddha, and what did he do first, and what did he do in the, what did he do in the middle, and what did he achieve at the end? There are three things we could see, and which are also applicable to any one of us or anybody who is interested to become a complete enlightened person called Buddha. So the first thing he did was he cultivated the altruistic mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta, Changju Sem. That's the first thing he did. And then with that kind of altruistic motivation or state of mind, in the middle, as we would say, he pursued the fulfillment of two types of accumulation of merit, positive energy, and accumulation of insight or wisdom for three great countless eons. That's what he did in the middle. So then what did he achieve at the end? So eventually, as a result of all those things he did first, cultivating bodhicitta and then fulfilling the two types of accumulation, finally he became a complete enlightened person called Buddha. So that's what he achieved. So any one of us who would like to be a Buddha, this is the process, if you will, that we need to follow. Now one could pose a question here. You can say, like, you know what? Isn't there a different way to get to the complete enlightened state? There's a faster route to get there. I heard that there's something called Tantra or Mantrayana or Vajrayana, and where you said that you have those techniques available, and if you follow them, that it is possible for an individual to become a Buddha in the short lifespan of this very life. Okay, now that seems like you don't have to go through 3 great countless eons, whatever that means, that's a long way. So that seems to be like a shortcut, route. So what about that? Well, the answer to that is yes. There are such techniques called esoteric or tantric techniques that could possibly help one to become a Buddha in one lifetime, but one completely needs a different way of thinking. One has to restructure the whole way of thinking, and that's what's involved in that.
가지 장면에서 뒤인데래 뒤서는 또 다가 아니 할로 된 대시 뒤서는 뭐지 대구야 말았어 또 뒤서 등기 더 안에 가지 장면에서 초 마사바요 마사고 여티네 뒤서 등도지 돈 안사 투요 그래서
Now whether we look from what is called discourse perspective or Sutrayana perspective of Buddhism, or whether we look at from Tantric perspective or Vajrayana perspective of Buddhism, the fact of the matter here is that in order to become a Buddha, one must accumulate merited wisdom that is worth of 3 great countless eons. Okay. Now the difference in these two perspectives is that from discourse perspective, it takes 3 great countless eons literally to fulfill the 2 types of accumulation. But if one were to follow the tantric path or perspective, it cuts short the time that is needed to complete the 2 types of accumulation. So it takes much less time, but one has to accumulate the merit and wisdom that is what we call equivalent to taking 3 countless eons to fulfill that. So I think we can find many examples to talk about, illustrate the difference between the Sutrayana perspective or the discourse perspective and the Tantric perspective here. It's like, let's say, we are going to, manufacture something, and that involves using our hands. So if we're going to use our hands, it might take 1 month or 2 months to finish the thing. But now if we have a technology, that might take just, an hour or a millisecond, we don't know. So it is faster. So that's what we're talking about. But the thing here to remember is whether you use your hands and take 3 months or 4 years or whatever to finish the thing, or whether you use a technology in a nanosecond, you finish it. But things that we need to finish the task, and how can we do it within, most effectively, and that's the difference we're talking about. So if we have the latest technology, it might take a nanosecond to finish a task, but it has to finish a task, to get what we want. And if we have to use the hand, it may take ages to finish it. So what I just told you in a nutshell is that in order to become a complete enlightened being called Buddha, one must fulfill or complete the 2 types of accumulation. That may take 3 great countless eons, or they may take a shorter time, but one has to fulfill the 2 types of accumulation of merit and wisdom. But in order to be able to do that, first we need to cultivate the altruistic mind of enlightenment, or bodhicitta, bodhisattva's attitude or the heart. So if you're wondering, what is somebody doing for 3 great countless eons, accumulating merit and wisdom, what does that really mean? What is involved here? What is really involved here is, in order to become an enlightened being, we must, that is M-U-S-T and underlined, and there's a must. We must get rid of the 2 types of mental obscuration. One is called delusions, kleshyas, and other is called obscuration to omniscience or knowledge. So we need to get rid of those 2 types of mental obscuration from within ourselves, and it is for that we fulfill the accumulation of merit and wisdom, which may take 3 great countless eons or may not. Yes. So our historical teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, first he generated the altruistic mind of enlightenment. Of course, there are different explanations how he did that, or there are stories, how he did that, maybe different versions of the story.
That relates up in Dole. And then you can tell the Vichit to Trumpet and don't have a zini to the station of Institute Canaris.
Now, if we were to rely upon a particular sutra, which is titled as Repaying the Kindnesses, that's the title of the sutra, Chilen Sabado. And in that sutra, it is mentioned that once upon a time, when Shakyamuni Buddha was as ordinary like anybody else, and he was in hell, and he was suffering like anybody else around him, and at that time, he couldn't bear the suffering that he witnessed that all other fellows are suffering. So at that moment, he generated the compassion, the altruism at that moment. So this is the one story or the version explanation. How did or when did our Buddha generated altruism? But in another sutra, which is titled as Sutra of Fortunate Eon, meaning that during this fortunate eon, 1,000 enlightened beings would manifest in the world. So that's what the sutra is talking about, how each of the Buddha, 1,000 Buddha, generated altruism. Now in that sutra, it is mentioned that once upon a time, Shakyamuni Buddha was a poor fellow, and then it is in the presence of another enlightened being by the name called Mahashakyamuni, Shakyatubjen, he offered a cup of porridge, and then he generated the altruistic attitude.
That
So I think that would be sufficient for today. At least 2 different sutras I mentioned, and each of them telling us how did Shakyamuni Buddha generate altruism initially. But more important perhaps to remember here is, what does altruism mean? Generating bodhicitta mean? What does it really mean? What it really means is that we develop this commitment in our mind that I'm going to seek complete enlightened state in order to benefit all other sentient beings. When we generate that kind of attitude, and that involves commitment, and that's what we call generating bodhicitta.
Tenets Maris.
So I'm generating altruism, the kind of in altruism Buddha generated that, as I just said, involved a strong commitment. It's not like simply wishing for something. It's like how nice it would be if I become Buddha for the sake of all others, okay? And then it's just kind of a, wish. There was no commitment involved. It's just a nice thing to think about. Not that much. Buddha said that I really want to become Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings, and I'm going to commit myself to that. Okay, so that altruistic, which involved with the commitment, is something very instrumental in his spiritual growth. So once an individual genuinely cultivates that kind of altruism which involves commitment, when you really have bodhicitta, the first initial moment of bodhicitta, it could be, then he or she, or in this case Shakyamuni Buddha, he reached the path of accumulation of greater vehicle Buddhism or Bodhisattva's way of life. See, in Buddhism, we talk about 5 spiritual paths in any vehicles. So in the Mahayana Buddhism or Bodhisattva's way of life, there are 5 paths, from the path of accumulation to the path of normal learning. Now that's my first footnote here. Okay. So while you are on now I just mentioned how do you get on the path of accumulation of bodhisattvas, right? So while you are on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, which is the next path, okay, one completes the accumulation of merit and wisdom for the first great countless eon. So while he was on the path of accumulation and the path of preparation, and he honored and made offerings to countless enlightened beings, other enlightened beings, and received teachings from countless Buddhas, all those things are involved in this, and fulfilled the accumulation of merit and wisdom for the first great countless eon. And then from the path of seeing, which is the third path, and all the way to the 7th spiritual ground of a bodhisattva. Maybe add another footnote here, because from the path of seeing to the path of meditation, we also talk about 10 spiritual grounds of a bodhisattva called Dasha Bhumi. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. So from the path of seeing all the way up to the 7th spiritual ground of bodhisattva, one fulfills the accumulation of merit and wisdom for the second great countless eon. That's what Shakyamuni Buddha did. When an individual reaches the path of seeing or attains the path of seeing, one sees emptiness non-conceptually. In other words, when a person sees emptiness as it is, without the network of the conceptions. One sees it directly or nakedly, as we would say. This is what the Buddha saw emptiness directly on the path of seeing. So, on the path of seeing, which is the third path, one starts to get rid of obscuration to omniscience, okay, by way of integrating method and wisdom. The wisdom here is the wisdom realizing emptiness as it is, and the method is the altruistic attitude of bodhicitta. So by combining altruism and the wisdom from the path of seeing, one starts to get rid of obscuration to omniscience.
다 되네네 사제와 고바 주바 다바 소숨스 그래서 띠자 다띠 숨제 갑래 아니 담에 숨베 아니 초다 산 그래서.
And then from the 8th spiritual ground of a bodhisattva, now don't mix the ground and the path together, okay, that's why I'm just trying to keep things clearly in my translation. So from the 8th spiritual ground to the 10th spiritual ground of a bodhisattva, these 3 grounds, 8, 9, 10, are called pure spiritual grounds. Okay, pure spiritual grounds. On these, 3 paths, one fulfills the accumulation of merit and wisdom for the 3rd great countless eon, and that's what Buddha did. So this explanation I just gave you, how Shakyamuni Buddha completed accumulation of merit and wisdom for 3 great countless eons on the 5 paths and the 10th spiritual ground. Of course, this is presented from Mahayana perspective. Now, if you look, at how one could become a Buddha from the Theravadin perspective, I think they will also agree that in order to become a Buddha, first one must generate bodhicitta or altruism. Okay. So they would say that yes, one must first accumulate, first generate altruism or bodhicitta, but that the way an individual fulfills merit and accumulation for 3 great countless eons, they have a little slightly different explanation, perhaps different or not. What they say is that during the first great countless eon, an individual makes offerings to and renders services to as many as 75,000 enlightened beings or Buddhas. Okay? When you honor, and this time my math is absolutely correct, okay, you don't have to doubt it, it is 75,000. 75,000 Buddhas, because math is this strange discipline that sometimes can get messed up, but this time it's right. 75,000 Buddhas, you make offerings to and you honor them and you receive teachings from them, then you fulfill the accumulation of the first great countless eon. So from my perspective, in order to accumulate merit and wisdom, you make offerings to countless enlightened beings. You see, the number was countless. But here, from the Theravadin perspective, the number is kind of an exacting number in some sense. It's 75,000 Buddhas. And then during the for the 2nd great countless eon, according to Theravadin perspective, I'm using the probably politically correct term here. I said Theravadin perspective. According to many Buddhist old literature, it's called Hinayana. Okay, but then some have issues with that. So I just want to mention that. So according to that perspective, during the 2nd great countless eon, an individual makes offerings to and receives teachings and so on to as many as 76,000 Buddhas, so 1,000 Buddhas more. Okay, And then during the third great countless eon, he or she or individual practitioner makes offerings to, receive teachings from, and so on, to as many as 77,000 Buddhas. And that's how you complete the accumulation of merit and wisdom for the third great countless eon. And according to Theravadan perspective, you will spend 100 eons accumulating merit to be able to actualize what is called the enlightened signs or the marks. Because the Buddha has major and minor signs of realization. So in order to realize those signs, one has to accumulate merit for 100 eons. From Mahayana perspective or greater vehicle perspective, a bodhisattva on the 10th spiritual ground. Okay, so this bodhisattva is referred to as the one who is on the last who is in the last. Well, this is where it gets technical, and I don't know where to get around with that one. So this is called a bodhisattva. First, let me technically translate it and then translate explanation, and that gives you the meaning. And just forget about the eloquence of the translation. This bodhisattva is called the bodhisattva on the 10th ground is called the bodhisattva on the last continuum. Okay, what the heck does that mean? Last continuum. This is where the explanation comes. Last continuum means that this bodhisattva is at this particular moment still has what we call the continuum of being an ordinary person, ordinary being. So once you transcend this ground, you are no more ordinary being. Okay, that's what we mean. The last continuum of being ordinary or ordinariness. Okay, if there's no such word, let's make one there. So the process involves that bodhisattva on the 10th ground, before he or she enters into this deep meditation, right, still is not completely enlightened. There's ordinariness, there retained. So once you enter into deep meditation, called meditative equipoise or emptiness, and when you come out of this meditation, you are already an enlightened being. Now you are no more ordinary. So why is that? Because while you are in this deep meditation, you are, you have internalized the most powerful antidote to get rid of the remnants of the true mental obscuration, delusions and obscuration to omniscience. So because that antidote is present, it has really removed those. Once you come out of that meditation, now you're completely free of delusions and obscuration to omniscience. So therefore, you are a complete enlightened or awakened person. Now, the next thing, if you're wondering, like, okay, so is there a particular location where, one first becomes a Buddha, or is there such things exist? Yes. When first one becomes a Buddha in a very pure land called, in the Sanskrit called Agnishta Pure Land. So as Geshe quoted relevant lines from a sutra which tell us that when you become Buddha first, okay, you will become Buddha in this particular location, if you like. It's called Agnishta Pure Land. Okay. So what happens is that the main source, as we would say, becomes a Buddha in the Agnishtha Pure Land, now this main source might have many emanations in other parts of the world. Okay, so when you become Buddha in the Agnishtha Pure Land as the main source of all this emanation, all these emanations in the other part of the world also become Buddha at the same time. So what we see in our human world, if somebody is becoming Buddha, this is an emanation of a, somebody else who is in the Agnishtha Pure Land becoming Buddha.
Because Baba, that is the Geshe Tobata, Lonin Tonga Koala, and a contact use the any correction, any Tambo, any Gandig in the Aligueris. Flattens any trade.
So let's refocus on Shakyamuni Buddha because we are today spending time to to understand his life a little bit more, or to remember his kindnesses to us. Before he came to this world, Shakyamuni Buddha was in Tushita Buddha field. So that means there were other celestial beings as companions. So Shakyamuni Buddha was in Tushita Buddha field, and then he decided that it was the right time to manifest in the human world, meaning this world particular. There could be humans in other worlds, but this particular world. So when he made that decision and he appeared in this world, then we said that he performed 12 main deeds or principal deeds. In a general sense, it is very, for an ordinary person, it's just impossible to talk about the qualities and the deeds of an enlightened being. That's just beyond our abilities and skills. Even it is said that for Buddhas to describe each other's qualities, that may not necessarily be easy to do. Okay. So that being said, so we just we focus on 12 main deeds of Shakyamuni Buddha.
Tal ko aneta igele ni gande ge ne yudu chani kong chel tamba tokar shugo res tamba tokar.
So when Buddha was in Tushita Buddha field, that was before he came down here, he was known by the name called Tamba Tokarbo.
Ta teni ma zambil phedu chanta jaba kyuni ge nan tangbo te ani tan dini gande ge ne ni point je bas ta posa te gande ne ni so pesa de jan zambil ma pheya de kyu res jaba tangbo tres.
So when Buddha decided to manifest in our world, so he had to come from Tushita Buddha field down to our world. So that is counted as the first principal deed. That's called the descent from Tushita Buddha field. Okay.
That in Java Tambu Dilan, the Liga and the church in Java Careers and Sanji Sanji Tame, but Tamunishina, when Ane Pacha Karsi church, Pacha Yaya, Tangana, and Koatang is only Dungini, Tavi Tavta, Mangokin do say 10 hours.
Koatana is only.
Mare, Congress, the Gandhi Nama Poditani, Kogan Javati, so that slash Yamapole, the song yours. Pendochim 9 hours. So if somebody is wondering why do we count that as a principal deed, coming down from Tushita down to the human world, but the thing is that Shakyamuni Buddha was in Tushita Buddha field, not sitting idly there, as he has nothing better to do. He was teaching, many divine beings there or celestial beings. So he benefited an innumerable number of beings spiritually, and then he thought it was the right time to come down to this human world and benefit more sentient beings here. So that's why we count Buddha's coming down from Tushita to our world as a principal deed. That in a home scooping servitors. And that Yumte, those that's the Bangalis a time ago. That nation and a home scooping servitors, tiny body.
And the second principal deed, second in the sense, is what we call conceiving in the womb of mother. Okay, and of course Buddha before came down, it's not like he randomly came down to the human world. He thought about all the things. Is this the right time, and where should I be, and who should be my mother, and so on. So there's so many things involved. Now we're not going to talk about every tidbit things. There's no time. To cut short all that story, the second principal deed is conception in the womb of mother.
So I
may not have enough time to explain much about each of these principal deeds, but at least I want to sort of list the 12 principal deeds, and so conceiving in the okay, so conception is the second. The third one is the actual birth. Okay, that's another principal deed. So being born, literally, into the world. And then the next principal deed has to do with how, as a teenager or a young, boy growing up, he has to go through the education system all the time. So he went through education, he learned about art and skills and all that. So that is considered as another principal deed. You get to see that the maybe I should tell a little bit about his education here. Of course, Shakyamuni Buddha, then he was not called Buddha. He was born in royal family, and his dad was a great Indian king by the name of King Shuddhodana. And so he had the resources and the power to bring the greatest of the experts and scholars available at that time in his kingdom and in the neighboring. So he invited the best of the experts and the teachers in different fields to tutor his son. So at the time, the young prince was called by the name of Siddhartha. Okay, and he was not called Buddha Shakyamuni. His name Siddhartha has this meaning that he fulfilled all the meaning or the purpose of the wishes of his mother. Okay, so since the time he conceived in the womb of the mother, whatever the mother wished for or she wanted, all the wishes were fulfilled, and from that is indicative of his name, Siddhartha. No. That thing that 이게 기회도 대신에 다 니마 당보대 배다 이게 장면도 다 가시는 된도이네 기다 코랑이 캡도 간식 간걸 러비어스. So on the first day, these experts, the teachers, the best of the brain available at the time came and started to teach him. On the very first day, they taught him so many words, or like tens and thousands, but he learned everything. They were teaching him. So on the very first day, whatever they started to teach, he just learned it right then and there, and then he said, could you teach me something more? Okay. So then the teacher said, what? Everything that I have learned in what is called in the linguistic discipline, maybe that's not linguistic discipline at the time, in the language and art, this is all there is to it to learn. So I told you everything I learned, and that is there in this whole discipline. Of course, then he came of the age, and his dad Shuddhodana wanted his son to get settled down, married, and rule the kingdom, and he has his plan for his son. No wonder he had, and so he said, okay, time to get married. Okay, and so looked for all these princesses everywhere and brought a bunch of them to get married and to be his queen. So that's considered as another principal deed.
다 샤지 보면 산소만 샥작 세모 샥작 보면 산소만 다 공거 세기 쇼를 세들 다 진지.
And so he's one of the queens by the name, who belonged to another Shakya clan, and by the name of Satoma. Now this definitely is Tibetan translation. I don't know what would be Sanskrit, but would it matter to you? Probably not. And
Out of the ocean.
No.
Out of the ocean.
Yeah, Gisela wants to translate in English, So ocean and earth, or something like that. Anyway, so from their conjugation, they gave birth to a son called Rahula.
That any that just zone Java, that Javaris, Java season in Javati. Jimmy Quater in Javat Kavaranda, Jimmy Quater in Javaji, and the Justice in Javaji.
So then, of course, he kind of ruled for the kingdom for a while, a little bit. That's considered as another principal deed because he administered, the kingdom for a while.
That any Shagan could do his if we want down that Mongo Cage in a huge Shagan could do it, Zig Sweet Nani, and that one is Sagul and it, Jabi contact Chosol Pebbles.
Teaching Sigur again.
Correct.
And Zabujung in a Sigur. Then the young at the Tangajan Mazan again. Then
the did Justice in Java.
Oh, no. I did this house again. Okay. And then at the age of 29, he, of course, he had a chance to get out of the walls of his kingdom because he was so protected, and and this whole long story anyway. Cut down that one. And then there was about age 29, he saw some signs like people were getting sick and somebody was dying and and all that. And then he said, okay, this whole thing is making no sense and I'm going to renounce the royal life and going to go and pursue spirituality. So he renounced the royal life and he went into forest. So that was 29 years old. And then he became ordained, right? He left the royal life and he went into the forest and he took ordination and he became monastic. Now that is counted as a principal deed.
That the need the rather soon in Takanavasta, Lodukawa Senta, those in the Gomjeni. And Lotul and it, Kawasin, Hubris.
And after his, monastic ordination, and he went into 6 years of intensive retreat of some sort. It's called a penance, and 6 years of really hardship. Thing that's considered as another principal deed.
That they do any Mamayori, the Jebuki, Palaka, the Cornadism of the country, Yobel Tambrava, because they are the Yuta. And it Lodukawas in that teaching, Lodukawas in it, and then Losum Song attack, Golosum Song pages, and it, no one's of Sanjay.
So he entered into 6 years of very hard, retreat life, tortured himself quite a bit, physically to an extent, and that didn't work out. Anyway, he pursued his spirituality, and at the age of 35, he became an enlightened being. So he became Buddha. So if we go by the Tibetan lunar calendar, on the 15th day, which is the full moon day of the 4th month, that is the time he became an enlightened person. So he became Buddha at the age of 35, and then he did not go and start to teach right away. So he sat in silence for 49 days. So he was thinking about, okay, is this the time to teach? If I teach, is anybody going to understand what I'm going to teach? Who should I teach first? And all these issues he, thought about, sitting in silence for 49 days, and then he decided to teach. So which is considered as his first turning of the wheel of Dharma, or his first sermon, or his first teaching, and that was yesterday.
중국 고사게 네데 다 콩그 가정 상제 동그 나네 콩 근회를 남들 숨도 패차요. 콩 남들 이바들 손자 그만 숨부터기 아니 저 가봐 송도 중국 가봐 가운데 당부 중국 가봐 가운데 노세 gond이 자니 아니 요아라나설에 도스코한테 노스 섹션때 배요.
Of course, he was not the first Buddha who ever came to this world. There were already three, ahead of him, and his three predecessors. So he thought about it. Where did they teach first? And all that. And so he realized that each of the three, predecessors, gave their first teaching in Varanasi. So he said, okay, that's where I'm going to go and teach.
Sanji Tong ani ngobazoba sanji se deni doji dentang ani chöju kolo tambo kose deni oyo Varanasi imbati ta sanji Tong samle kiwa chagu res.
So as I mentioned a little earlier that during this eon, we believe that there are going to be 1,000 Buddhas who would manifest in this world. Out of them, Shakyamuni Buddha is the fourth. Okay, now imagine that there are a lot more to come than who came already. And so each of them would perform, as we would say, the deed of becoming an enlightened being in Bodh Gaya, in the Indian state of Bihar, present right now. And they would give their first teaching in Varanasi, in the Uttar Pradesh state of India. Yeah. So that's how every Buddha, each of the 1,000 Buddha would do exactly the same thing. They would become Buddha in Bodh Gaya, and they would give the first teaching in Varanasi.
So the dark home de Varanasi page, and it called like this Zambuzite, Hema and Pala and Yandiso and those Tanga de called the Lord will Kashin and those Yudisani, and they consulted Tavi Toyama, just consult. Then Sanjay Kundil Madevish Chinsi Varanasi Dedi.
So after 49 days of silence and thinking about everything, what he should teach, where he should teach, and all of that, and then he went to Saranath Varanasi too. And this is where he met what we call now as the first 5 disciples of Buddha. These were actually the 5 attendants his dad sent to serve him, but somehow when Buddha entered into 6 hardship years of retreat, they thought, oh, that was too much, I can't handle it. So let's move somewhere, leave this guy here. And they just went to Varanasi when Buddha was in Bodh Gaya at the time, and now they met. Okay, so Shakyamuni came and he ran into these 5 people here.
That Konju Varanasi, they do Jani. That Sanjay Dushini. Job say Changma, that is very Kong Pevit, the John Bonnet Toya, Tony Johnny Konju Nanjun Jini, Nanju Ya Malang, Kanga Guyam Maji, Kanga me Karseta. Welcome, Majis. Konju Chimche now.
So this group of 5 saw Buddha coming from a distance, so then they just had a quick conversation. The guy is coming from there. Let us not, welcome him. None of us is going to stand up and pay respect to him and don't welcome him. Just let it be. Okay, that's what they talked among themselves.
That Sanjay to till new pay Sanjay Zig Mazeshate, that Yalani, that Kanga Yalan Kugishi, and the Shamba Lexus, and those in the Peronas, and those here.
But that's what they decided. They said, well, the guy is coming from there, let us not get up and pay respect or do any of those things and just leave him alone. But when Buddha came closer to them, because of his presence, enlightened presence, one started to get up and pay respect, say hello, nice to see you. And then everybody else started to get up like howdy, and so they all got up and respected and greeted him.
So that the name is and the consulta, Chue Tambo Sungsa.
So then, these are the first, main disciples, where Buddha gave his first teaching, to them. So they become his first 5 disciples. Now, if you're wondering, how come these 5, people who kind of rebelled against him, and left him alone and moved to somewhere else, now they got to be the first, disciples. Well, I mean, it seems like over many lifetimes they had that karmic connection built in, and so there was this auspiciousness, as we would say, created. So that's why they became, under the given situation, the first 5 disciples.
kunzu gelung abu de ta de ta ju lang ba meng chi zang de se ko ko de ne se nga re nga bu de ni nga ma ta mo ti ke ni ta ku li she ma
Maybe I can tell you one story about this 5 and the connection to Buddha. In some another lifetime, these 5 were born as 5 cubs of a tigress. Okay, there were these little cubs of a tigress.
So that kunzu ni ta de de da ge de he to ba jabu se jene jabu hinta ki mu de ta se jene kunzu pingya sum shin duk shin yo shumare.
So that another time, Shakyamuni Buddha was born as the youngest prince of a royal, family again, and the 3 brothers, they went into stroll into the forest, and and Buddha was the youngest of the 3 at the time.
So that kong de ja ne ta dung abo de ta mo la an ta lu shin ni ani mo pa na da ge de me mo pa na ra ni chu san ji bi kap su chu ji du de ta mo len kunzu le te 그래서 그저 톱에 효스 너무 좀 간지.
And of course, there's a long story behind it, but we have to cut it short again. Is that the mother tigress, and the 5 cubs were dying of starvation. They didn't get to eat anything for days. So the young prince really felt so much compassion for them, and somehow he tricked the other brothers. Whatever, cut short the story, and he just fed himself to them, just feasted them. And then at that time he prayed honestly that this time I feed them with my body and blood, but eventually when I become a Buddha, may I be able to give them the first teaching so that they can taste the Dharma first time. Okay, that's what he prayed. Of course, when you look at the Buddha's many previous lifetimes, how he really sacrificed so much for the sake of Dharma, spiritual development. There are other stories like once Shakyamuni Buddha was a Brahmin by the name of Brahmin of Shanti, means patience. And then there's a whole story about how the king got mad because his queens were all attracted to this funny guy here and not attracted to him anymore. He got so mad and he just chopped his limb and said, what the hell you are doing with my wives? And he said, well, I am yogi, practitioner of patience. He said, yeah, okay, let me tell you one more. Just chop the other limb. He said, well, do whatever you like. I'm a patience person. So, he sacrificed a lot, in spiritual pursuit in many lifetimes. So one of these 5 disciples, for example, they had many karmic connections with Buddha over many lifetimes. For example, the Kuncheko Dinaya, one of the 5, he was a king probably at the time. Maybe he was the angry king who did this to him, Buddha. So anyway, Buddha prayed that when eventually I become Buddha, may I be able to provide them the nectar of Dharma. Okay, so this is what happened.
That is it. And that didn't any tangare. And the Congo notion that Varanasale Sarna Singdo, that Kanshing was Varana secure. Didn't pay the Tani, Namani, Koan said to Usungus, you to some shit, that you don't back in those in a you to Hindu's child. So that I give it to you, Shane, call that church call Tambote, then Choko numbers.
And so Shakyamuni Buddha came to Varanasi, a particular place called Saranath in Varanasi, and he saw that there were, the 4 seats, 3 seats belonged to the 3 previous Buddhas, and there was 1 seat vacant so he sat on that seat, and then he started to teach. So he paid his respect to the 3 other seats, and he circumambulated them, and then he sat on the 4th one, and then he started to teach the 4 noble truths.
Ta demba jibu te ndusire ta ali ngola debas shebala deba shan deba de jeba deba sundusine sundus yajuaris. Nanju demba ki demba is ta te mato ta tende chama shejuaris.
So Buddha gave his first teaching on the 4 noble truths called Arya Satyas, and usually that's what everybody says. Yeah, Buddha gave 4 noble truths teaching. Well, there's more to that. The way he taught it, that's even gets more complicated. And in his presentation, for example, like Buddha defined the nature or the entity of each of the 4 noble truths, Ngola Deva. He talked about the functionality of the 4 noble truths, what good they do, to serve. He talked about the outcome of the 4 noble truths. So, he talked about the 4 noble truths in many different ways.
Then the Dunga puppy Dembo, then the Kunjum puppy Dembo, then the Lamp puppy Dembo, then the Gopa puppy Dembo also. Those they can go some Tembatele, all of the pass.
So first he simply introduced the 4 noble truths. He said, this is the truth of suffering, this is the truth of cause of suffering, this is the truth of cessation of suffering, and this is the true path leading to the cessation. So basically he tried to define each of the 4 noble truths.
다 니바데 셀레드 하고고다 가르쳐고서는 동에 해버샤 그랬어. 동에 해버샤. 군중 빵을샤. 곡빵 원데샤. 람 곰버샤. 저ben 동에 알리 동에 해버렸어. 가는 그랬어.
So first he defined each of the 4 noble truths, and then the next one he talked about, as we say, the functionality of the 4 noble truths, meaning like he said, truth of suffering is something that you should realize it. You must realize what true suffering means. But true cause of the suffering is that which you should abandon, get rid of. Okay? And true cessation of suffering is that you should actualize, you should really attain. And true path is something you should cultivate through meditation that leads you to the cessation. So he talked about the 4 noble truths from functional perspective.
동에 해는 다 동에 마히나 동에 그저 데본데 세기야 말이스. 저 전에 동에 해버시 동에 해서는 또 동에 용사 그저 데 학거버시니 아다 군주도 빵거리스.
In other words, he approached the 4 noble truths from functional perspective, meaning that first thing first, we need to realize what true suffering is. If we don't realize this, we will never ever going to really wish to be free from suffering. It's not going to work. We really don't know what suffering is, the scope of suffering and all that. So once we realize what suffering is, now we want to really get rid of it. And that's a natural thing to wish for. So then you say, okay, how can I get rid of a suffering? Then this is where Buddha said, abandon the true cause of suffering. Now we know, okay, to get rid of the suffering, you must get rid of its cause.
동에 해버서서 해주고 동에때 나란속 등산 동에 해야때 쇼킹도 하고 그 말이었어. 해주고 동에들은 만나고 숨어야 되랬어.
So when Buddha said, understand or realize suffering, if we are wondering, like, well, I know about the suffering quite a bit. Well, as a matter of fact, that's quite a bit. Not complete understanding of the suffering. Because if we think that, well, we know a lot about suffering problems, what we really know is still a very limited nature of suffering. Okay, we don't understand ins and outs of suffering and every shades of suffering. We don't. There are many forms of suffering.
완전히 해약은 동해에 가르쳐서는 빼나 어디 매기층이 동해 요야다. 주의천 동해 차안의 동해 요야다. 내 나네 동해 요야다. 전주 가라서 하고 요러버스. 당 가라서 뭐 해야 가르쳐서는 저희 동해도 가라서 하고 문도 왔어. 저번도 지 동해도 하고 가면 땡이부터 하고 할 가고랬어.
The kind of suffering that we know and all kinds of suffering we know pretty much belong to this particular category of suffering called suffering of misery, which basically means if you get a headache, you got a pain. Okay? And if you put your hand in a fire, it's going to burn you. Now it's really, suffering. Or it's too hot, we know this is a suffering. It's too cold, we know it is painful. Okay, and house get burned down. There's a flooding and everything. These are all we see as suffering, and we know it. But there are other forms of suffering we don't really know, such as suffering of change. That we don't know. Pervasive suffering. The fact of the matter is that we are born, in this particular situation with delusions and contaminated karmic action with all these aggregates. That is in the very nature of suffering, but we don't know.
Change, Rita.
Yeah, Geshe, you can speak in English.
No, I can't. I can't. So, Jewi dunge de ngaranso hago mun domas. When Jewi dunge de nega gu dewa kanlechi na ngaranso nega gu dewa samalo Jewi dunge chagin gares.
So we don't know, suffering of change, which includes all the things that we regard as pleasurable and feel good stuff. All these things are in reality suffering. They are in the nature of change.
차디 전에 또 정보수는 상이야. 정보수 전이야. 대 만들베스테니야. 차 대시 정보수는 상. 아니 다 가르쳐 그랬어. 근데 망고 진도 왔다. 야 랑드선데 야 랑데. 그래서 마데는서 마데스턴데 야 랑드선. 다 내게데 망고 진도 왔어.
Some of the kind of things we experience in our life which might indicate what suffering of change is, like we feel too hot. So maybe, we take off our clothes, or we take swim, or we put, crank the air conditioning, whatever feels so good. And this is it. Well, stay for a while. Now it's getting too cold. Okay, this is not working out fine. Okay, I need to put on more clothes. I'm going to crank up the heater or something. You do that. Okay, that feels much better now. Well, then it gets too hot. Yeah, we're sitting down, feels very comfortable now. After a while, it started to, give pain to, the things we're sitting on. And, okay, I'm going to need to get up. Oh, that feels really good, relaxing my muscles, everything. And standing for a while, wow, this is painful now. I've got to sit down. See how all these things change. Looks like good, feels comfortable now, pleasurable. It's just in every minute, becomes painful.
So that's it. That chabanduji don't intelligent. When Kovenel don't Kovenel sheban zunte chabanduji don't nagus. In the same keke yamari. So now
if you think that suffering of change is something difficult to understand, which we don't understand much, now the pervasive suffering is even all the more difficult for us to understand, because what this means is that as long as our rebirth in samsara or cyclic existence is precipitated by delusions and contaminated karmic actions, no matter wherever we are, what form we have, our aggregates are contaminated and they are in the nature of suffering. Okay. Now that we don't realize it. So we need to educate ourselves about the different levels of suffering and know about all these different landscapes of suffering. Suffering of misery, suffering of change, pervasive suffering. And when we truly realize, understand this, we say, okay, I got enough of that. Now I really want to get out of suffering. Then we say, okay, how do I do that? We need to abandon the causes of suffering. Practically there are two: delusions and contaminated karmic actions. So this is what we always need to keep in our mind, that when we engage in the study of Dharma or spirituality, we cultivate spirituality, or do whatever practice we do, small, moderate, big, study, practice. It does not matter. Whatever we are doing, we should see that it is really affecting or counteracting our delusions and contaminated karmic actions. That should be the goal. We study a little bit of Dharma, well, that should be targeted at counteracting our delusions and contaminated karmic actions. We do big studies, okay, that should also be focused on counteracting delusions and contaminated karmic actions. So that should be our goal.
So that 아니 럼바송 그난다 님바드 가르고서 자그 풍부를 아니 시진도 되는 거죠. 손에 콜로 바바드 거 나머리스.
And while Buddha is known for turning what is called the three wheels of Dharma, or he gave three different sets of teachings. And I think I'll have to run through this list again quickly because of time. That he gave his first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. He gave his second teaching on wisdom gone beyond, or transcendental wisdom. It's called Prajna Paramita teachings in a place called Vulture's Peak, Girthkuti. Where is it now? In the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, I think. Near Bodh Gaya, by the way.
Kolo Papa Gozani, any Churtala, Demba Yameta, the Chabar Machine, they made the Sumbaris. Chutamji.
So, during his first teaching on the Four Noble Truths, Buddha did not make any kind of a subtle distinctions between do things exist truly or not truly, or any of those distinctions. He just simply said, nothing exists truly. Okay.
Kolo somebody any young bakin, ne young bakin, like number shevi chunkorosinte, and those equal numbers.
But he did that during his third round of teaching, or the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, in a place called Vaishali in India. And this is where he really tried to differentiate between different characteristics of phenomena. Okay, and now he started to differentiate what really truly exists, what don't exist. He started to make the distinctions. So if we follow the line of thought in what is called Unraveling Thought Sutra, Unraveling Thought Sutra, then Buddha said, all imputed phenomena are without, they do not exist by way of their own characteristics. They do not exist by way of their own characteristics, but dependent phenomena and thoroughly established phenomena, I know I'm throwing a lot of terms here, do exist by way of their own characteristics. Now you see how he started to make a distinction between different characteristics of phenomena.
Yes. That the nigga color and some corn, any corn, and then Anita Garrett. Only choose color caution. Not any in the taconing in the September.
So Buddha gave three, sets of teachings. And then, of course, at the end of his life, he passed into parinirvana, or he passed away. That's another principal deed. So when we talk about Buddha passing away, it's very different from how ordinary persons pass away. Okay, we need to understand that. That's why we try to use the one language called parinirvana. And what that really means is that, as it is said in a sutra called the Golden Light Sutra, that enlightened beings never die. There's no such thing as an enlightened being, dies at a certain period of time. What will happen is they may decide to dissolve their physical forms in a particular world system and then move to another world system. That's what they do. So when Shakyamuni Buddha, we said, passed away, what we really meant is, he said, I'm going to dissolve my physical form here, but, that does not mean he really died. Okay, he is manifesting in some other world systems.
Sanjay Nyangi Homada, Church and Nupper Majors, and Dalton Sungwa.
So in the sutra it says, Buddhas never die and Dharma never disappears.
Yena Tactus race. Just a Tatandang here at the Javakuni, you come Dilla Tempe, Zambiling Dilla Tempe at the Javating race.
So these 12 principal deeds of Shakyamuni Buddha that I just very briefly talked about, or even I just kind of highlighted them, these are the what we call the important deeds of a Buddha's life when he manifested in our world system. I'm not talking about Buddha's activities in some other world systems, you know. Because enlightened beings have such capacity that they can manifest themselves in a billion world systems and can perform billions of actions all at the same time. So, I mean, can we ever finish talking about them, even start to talk about them? That's just impossible to do. So if we take time and kind of use the logic and use the reasoning and all that, there are a lot of avenues, that we can explore and, investigate Buddha's life and deeds. More importantly, what we really need to do is try to, if you will, try to extract the essence of Buddha's teachings, because he taught so many things, but what are the essence of Buddha's teachings? So we should try to get hold of them. So what are we talking about here? Shakyamuni Buddha himself made it very clear. He said, never accumulate any kind of negativity. So there is basically no excuse. If something is negative, in a sense, do not do it. Don't do it. Okay? And Keva Prisum Sobache, accumulate the wealth of virtue. If something is positive, beneficial, constructive, we should do that.
That thing don't do dinner. Digba as you said, Digba Sasa get the singing center, Kanje, Zo the singing center, and a rank Lutangata using singing yen never done mashes, never late on mashes cannon.
So if we try to look at what does it mean, never accumulate negativity. I mean, how do we accumulate negativity? Mostly in relation to sentient beings, isn't it? So this basically means that we must not, harm sentient beings either physically or verbally or mentally. Do not hurt others, through our actions of body, speech, and mind. Accumulate the wealth of virtue. Of course, there are many virtues or positive actions we can do, but among them, some of the greatest ones that we can do is cultivate compassion for sentient beings, cultivate love for sentient beings, cultivate altruism for sentient beings. So these are some of the most powerful virtues that we can accumulate and bring benefit to others, because we really care about other sentient beings.
Rang sending on dulce. That told Karisana, Rang Shawa told Karishagrasana, Rang Sim Madu to Doeki, Tang about the Chevres economy.
So in one stanza, those are the first two lines of the stanza, never accumulate negativity, accumulate the wealth of virtue. Then the third line says, thoroughly subdue our mind or tame our mind. And that's the most important thing to do, because our mind is not tamed. It is deluded, it's unruly, it is crazy, it is, weird, whatever. So now we need to make it normal and, subdued and positive. So that's the most important thing to do.
Dungin Julia good Pakani, Dewan Julia got same going to Jovatati, the Chuzogu, just around the same dues in the digitaries.
So when we talk about taming our mind, basically means we need to transform our mind, because certain state of our mind brings us a lot of suffering that we don't want. Okay, we run through so many headaches. But certain state of mind brings us joy and happiness and peace that we like and we want. Okay, so considering what we want and we don't want, so it is vital and essential for us to subdue our mind or change our mind so that we get what we want, peace, happiness, and goodness. Because all the feelings that we go through are happening in our mind. Okay? So if we train our mind, then we are really able to stop the suffering and we're able to get, what we want.
That time then Sanjay Temba is, I think
and then he concludes these lines by the last line of the stanza says, this is the teaching of Buddha. This is the doctrine of Buddha. Okay, this is the advice I could give you. And if you want the advice, here's one. Okay?
Oh, yes. That ring Sanjay Dorjee, Chungo teaching Chabachire, they so saying Sanjay and Zabate, my cubes.
So yesterday was, the Buddha's turning off the first wheel of Dharma. And so because of that, in order to commemorate that and honor that, and remember Buddha's kindnesses, so today I just spent time talking about Buddha's life a little bit and his deeds.
Yes. So that is that turns out any tanda rugby cubres, then the region that Paris kept the Hegors, Kina, Sanjay Tame, and
of course, I have not been able to do justice within a given time, to Buddha. There's so much more to learn about Buddha's life stories, and I just kind of highlighted things here. And so once we really learn more about Buddha's life and what he did, then I think that really becomes very inspirational for us. That gives us the inspiration in our spiritual quest and all that. So that is very important for us to study more about Buddha's life.
That ring Chawa Chemo, no singaran Somalo, this is David Hidake, rest gives us rest, gets a science and Somalo.
So today is another hot day and it's humid, but you all have been very patient and smiling and so very nice. So I think we all made quite a good effort here to participate in the teaching, and we have definitely created or accumulated positive energy.
That's Kali Java Tame, Hawaii, some Waka, that is Naranso, any link, any church gave us all a tenny. And this Sanji Temper of Ketaji in the Nepata. Joy which within the shape of Thomas Shukuri Cabin, but the 2 units that may be Hulu water. Only children who choose Joe Puman, Trinity Shawnation and Rubat. In the come that the year the Mutibiku Tota, the Henny, Twinchil, Lesota, and maybe Hulu.
So it is very good that we have come together, we have bared the heat of the day, and so we have accumulated certain merit, and we don't want our merit or the positive energy to go waste. So we want to do an altruistic dedication of our merit. So we do that, as you know it already very well. We dedicate our merit for the flourishing of Dharma, the source of benefits and happiness throughout the universe. May His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all other great holy masters, wherever they are in any part of the world and universe, may they live long and be successful in fulfilling their visions benefiting sentient beings. May spiritual communities throughout the world and spiritual practitioners from all traditions remain healthy, harmonious, and be successful in fulfilling their spiritual aspirations. May these and other world environments be free of all kinds of unwanted pains and problems, and beings find peace, happiness, prosperity, and spirituality. Last but not least, we dedicate our collective merit for all kind mother sentient beings to be free from the fears and dangers of 2 types of mental obscuration, delusions, and imprints of delusions, which are obscuration to omniscience, and maybe all reach complete enlightened state quickly.
shang chu sim chu ren bo che ma je ba nam she ju je she ba nyam ba me ba da ko ne gong de pe wo sho dong ni dang wa ren bo che ma je ba nam she ju je she ba nyam ba me ba da ko ne gong de pe wo sho gang zhe ra be gu be jian ka ma de pe da de wa ma re zu we ne xie re zhen wa de de jia su yi xia be sin de ba du de ju ji sa ye be je shu xie me do zhen pre re wa le ye ni de jian ba de sang ye yin do me de mu wa yi zhu gui nam da jin lo xue bu shu yi dam gu ru ren da la ga ni ya da ya